Thomas J. Hylton received the 2022 Planning Advocate Award under the Montgomery Awards program for his lifelong advocacy promoting historic preservation, land conservation, and vibrant, livable communities. I'm here in Pottstown Borough, which has realized much of the benefit from his efforts, where Tom has lived and worked for over 40 years. Let's find out more about that.
I've lived all of my 74 years in traditional cities and towns in Pennsylvania. I grew up walking to school from kindergarten through 12th grade. My senior year at William Allen, I was accepted at Kutztown State College, and I was able to take a Trailways bus from Allentown to Kutztown for 4 years. So I wanted to work somewhere where I could walk to work. So I went around to various newspapers in southeastern Pennsylvania looking for a job, and I walked into the Mercury here in Pottstown, and that very day they fired someone and they had an immediate opening. So that was my beginning in Pottstown. And I wanted to live as close to the newspaper as possible. So within 6 months of getting my job at the Mercury, we bought a house just across the street from the Mercury where we've lived for 50 years. So across the street from my house was a big high school. It was the 1923 Pottstown High School. And then in 1982, 10 years after I lived here, they decided to tear it down. And I was absolutely astonished. I thought it would be here forever. And it was such a horrible decision in my mind that I realized I wanted to get involved. I had been an observer of events, but now I wanted to become a person who was actively involved in events.
I've had the pleasure to work with Tom on and off for the last 25 years. And he always amazes me with his resolve and his persistence in what he does. And also how he convinces people that his ideas are their ideas, and then they buy into them and things happen. And that's a mark of somebody wrote about Tom that he's a leader without power, and he chooses to do things that way.
So a few months after they tore down Pottstown High School, I was in the city of Lancaster, which has incredibly beautiful architecture. But I also noted that it had a lot of street trees, little trees scattered all over town. Obviously not some planned planting project. So I came back in Pottstown and I went to the publisher of my newspaper. And newspapers, this is before the internet, they were very powerful and they were very profitable. So I went to him, the publisher, and I said, hey, let's raise $500,000 to plant street trees in Pottstown. I mean, they're good anywhere. We make a huge impact on the appearance of our town. He said, okay. So we raised $500,000 in about a 3-year period, and we planted about 1,300 street trees. And there is the beginning of Trees Incorporated, which 38 years later, I'm still running here in town. And over those 38 years, we've planted about 2,800 new and replacement trees. Around the same time, we started another nonprofit at that time called Old Pottstown Preservation Society, and we wanted to preserve our historic architecture. We want to create a National Register Historic District, so we did the research to demonstrate that we had a lot of wonderful historic buildings. I wrote the nomination in 1985. We got our first National Register Historic District.
In the 1980s, I was on the board at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, nominating a committee for the National Register of Historic Places. And I served on the group that surveyed Pottstown. And in doing so, we defined the borders of the historic district. So I became very enamored with Pottstown at that time. As an architect, I also worked on a number of the historic buildings along Main Street or High Street, and really got to know Tom through his work at the Mercury. And I really enjoyed his passions.
And so we renovated a lot of buildings in downtown Pottstown in the mid-1980s using historic preservation tax credits. And we're doing that still today. The big event in my professional life was winning a Pulitzer Prize. And here's how that happened. By the late 1980s, I was the editorial writer for the Mercury, still at the paper. And there was a great deal of concern all over southeastern Pennsylvania, but especially in Chester County and western Montgomery County about the loss of farmland and open space. And so I suggested in a lot of editorials that Chester County particularly should pass a $50 million bond issue to preserve farmland and open space. And the bond issue went to a referendum. It was overwhelmingly approved with 80% of the vote, and those editorials won the Pulitzer. I decided to write a book about saving our traditional towns and our countryside. And so I went to Mary Donati, who was the president of Preservation Pennsylvania, which is a statewide historic preservation organization, to partner with them as a nonprofit to raise money to print a very beautiful color coffee table book talking about our wonderful towns and countryside in Pennsylvania and how we could save them. And from writing that book and giving addresses to the House and the Senate of the Pennsylvania legislature and addressing various groups, it got to the point where I gave about 450 talks in Pennsylvania and all across the country about historic preservation and the importance of saving our towns and countryside.
It was in 1995 when, as president of Preservation Pennsylvania, we sponsored Tom's book. And one of the reasons we wanted to sponsor this book, and I also wrote the foreword to the book, was that even though Preservation Pennsylvania is about historic buildings, they don't exist in isolation. And in order for these historic buildings in our communities, and here in Pennsylvania, we have a really rich set of resources, in order for them to exist and continue, is that they need to be used, they need to be appreciated, and they need to be within the context that is so important for our historic towns. Tom kind of brought this whole concept of ours as well to the fore in his book.
His influence, I think, goes way beyond Pottstown. It goes really across the state of Pennsylvania and across parts of the country. You may know Tom has lectured over probably 500 places and maybe more, promoting really good planning ideas. I had occasion to stay in the Estonian Hotel a couple of months ago up in Easton, Pennsylvania, and I opened up their little booklet, and right there was a reference to Save Our Land, Save Our Towns by Tom Hylton. So you never know where his influence is going to pop up.
So one of the things I was doing in regards to my book, Save Our Land, Save Our Towns, was encouraging walkable neighborhood schools. So to make a long story short, we ran for the school board, we got elected to the school board, and we had a long, protracted fight to try and save our neighborhood schools, which we did. And then we want to encourage kids to walk to school. So our nonprofit hired Peter Simoni to do an initial study for bike lanes and walkability to our schools. And then we got the local Health and Wellness Foundation to pay for the engineering. And we got a $1.3 million grant to install bike lanes in Pottstown and also to fix a lot of sidewalks. And now the school district is actually encouraging kids to walk or to ride bikes to school, which was unheard of 15 years ago. So some other things we did with the neighborhood schools after restoring them and renovating and restoring them was that we put some meadows. We had a school with 3 acres of grass. It was a swale, it wasn't really usable for anything, and we persuaded the school board to convert that to a meadow. And that turned out so well that the school board expanded the meadows, all designed by Peter Simoni, expanded the meadows to all our properties, and now we have 11 acres of meadows. We planted a nursery behind this high school, 70 trees in 2018, and just on Saturday, we have a digger who came in with his mechanical tree spade, and he dug up all 70 trees, and we are now in the process of replanting those trees, about 15 of them as street trees in the downtown, and the other ones which are going to be on school district property.
I wish every community in Pennsylvania and in every state in the union had a Tom Hylton, because he truly has done so much that it's hard for words to describe.
Because good ideas can be very dangerous, and they challenge the status quo, and sometimes they're intimidating. So Tom not intentionally ruffles some feathers, but when those in power get over that, they finally see the wisdom of what Tom's promoting. So I think that has worked very well over the years, and he's accomplished so many things and changed so many minds and educated so many people. I don't think there's anybody quite like Tom.
I hope you've enjoyed learning about the work Tom has accomplished over his career. Thank you for taking the time to hear from this award-winning planning advocate.